There are moments in life when people return to a place they once left behind, not because they are looking for something, but because they finally admit they've lost something along the way. For Ethan, that moment came on a quiet Thursday morning, when he stepped off the bus and into the town he thought he had outgrown. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel victorious. He felt tired, like someone who had been running for too long, with no finish line in sight. Ethan was 25, once a passionate guitarist who believed ambition alone could bend the world to his will. But years of trying to prove himself, moving from gig to gig, chasing approval, failing more often than he succeeded, left him with a kind of exhaustion he couldn't hide anymore. The kind that doesn't scream, but settles quietly inside the bones. Across town, Lily, 24, was facing her own storm. She still lived in the same neighborhood, still worked part-time at a small community cafe, and still wrote music in the corner of her room. But life had not been gentle. A relationship that dimmed her confidence. A career path that twisted away from her plans. And a loneliness that grew louder each time she picked up her guitar. She used to play for joy. Now she played to remember who she used to be. Once they had been inseparable. Two dreamers with a small band and the belief that the world would someday hear their music. But life happened, as it always does. Ethan left the town to make it, and Lily stayed behind with roots she didn't know were holding her down. When they finally saw each other again after 4 long years, it wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no grand reunion. Just a subtle recognition in both of their eyes. They weren't the same people anymore. Their old rehearsal space still existed, a dusty room above an abandoned print shop. The room where they once laughed, argued, and promised not to give up on their dreams. It felt smaller now, or perhaps they had simply grown too far away from the people they once were. Ethan placed his guitar case on the floor and paused. His hands weren't steady. Lily noticed, but she said nothing. She understood that kind of trembling, the kind caused not by fear, but by carrying disappointment for too long. They began playing, not well, not confidently, but honestly. And in that quiet, fragile moment, Lily realized something. Despite everything life had taken from her, music was still the only place she felt real. Ethan realized something too. All those years chasing the crowd's applause had made him forget the joy of simply being understood. Piece by piece, the truth between them began to surface. Lily's burnout. Ethan's failures. The way they both tried to pretend they were fine, when they were far from it. There is a certain kind of honesty that only music can demand. An honesty that doesn't need words, only presence. And as they played, Ethan felt like the bloody nose of defeat, from all those years, finally had somewhere to bleed out. Lily felt her victory bell, long silent, ring in a place deeper than pride, somewhere closer to hope. The song they crafted that afternoon wasn't perfect. But it was true. It was soft, cracked in places, and full of the small hurts they had both hidden. Yet somehow that made it beautiful. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel like he was chasing something impossible. He felt grounded, anchored by the quiet strength Lily carried, even when she didn't see it in herself. Lily, listening to the trembling in Ethan's strumming, realized she wasn't the only one who had been fighting silent battles. She wasn't the only one tired of pretending. They met again the next day. And the next. Not because they were trying to revive their old band, and not because either of them had a plan, but because sitting in that dusty room made it easier to breathe. Slowly, their routines formed a rhythm. They talked less and listened more. They let the music fill the blank spaces where explanations would have been too heavy. Their progress wasn't linear. There were days Ethan couldn't play more than a few chords without frustration rising in his chest. There were days Lily couldn't write a single line because the weight of past failures pressed too hard. But they kept showing up. And sometimes, showing up is the most honest form of courage. Weeks later, as evening light poured through the small window of the rehearsal room, Ethan looked at Lily and realized something quietly life-changing. His whole world had revolved around the wrong chase. Validation. Recognition. Success measured by numbers and strangers' opinions. But Lily reminded him of a different kind of chase, one that led inward, not outward. One that asked him to be vulnerable, not flawless. And Lily, watching Ethan gradually soften, realized she had been standing still for too long. afraid to step forward because she didn't trust herself anymore. But healing wasn't a race. It didn't ask her to win. It only asked her to try again. Their song, unfinished but alive, marked the beginning of their quiet return to themselves. No grand comeback, no sudden transformation. Just two friends rediscovering the parts of themselves they thought they had lost. And as they packed up for the night, Ethan caught the faintest echo of a lyric they had written together earlier. Hold on. Everything's coming up roses. For once, those words didn't sound naive. They sounded possible. And maybe, sometimes possible, is enough to begin again.